Lincoln High School had stood for over 70 years, its red brick walls weathered by time and secrets. Students spoke in hushed voices about strange occurrences, textbooks vanishing from lockers, whispers slithering through empty hallways, and the chilling feeling of being watched when alone. Most dismissed these as rumors, but some swore the school held something far more sinister. Maggie Holloway never believed in ghost stories. A senior with her eyes set on college, she was too busy juggling AP classes, yearbook duties, and the stress of upcoming applications to worry about childish fears. But on a cold October evening, staying late to finish a project, she would learn that some legends were not just stories. The school was eerily quiet after hours, the usual chatter and footsteps replaced by the occasional creak of old pipes. Maggie sat alone in the computer lab, typing furiously. The deadline for the student magazine was the next day, and she refused to leave until her work was perfect. A distant clang echoed through the empty halls. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It could have been the janitor, she reasoned. Shaking off the unease creeping up her spine, she resumed typing. Clang. This time it was closer. Maggie's breath hitched. She glanced at the clock, 9:42 p.m. Too late for any staff to still be around. She stood, peering out into the dimly lit hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long, shifting shadows. Hello, she called. Silence. She turned back to her seat, but the moment she did, she heard it, a whisper, faint and dry like dead leaves scraping across pavement. Maggie. Her heart nearly stopped. She spun around, her pulse pounding in her ears. The hallway was empty. No sign of anyone. She grabbed her bag, deciding she had worked enough for the night. As she made her way down the corridor, her footsteps echoed too loudly. The air felt heavier, colder. She quickened her pace. The whisper came again. Closer. She reached the main doors only to find them locked. Her stomach lurched. The school had automatic security locks after 9:30, but she had seen the janitor earlier. He should still be here. Turning on her phone flashlight, she moved cautiously toward the janitor's closet near the cafeteria. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, the darkness at the edges seeming to breathe. A locker door slammed shut. She spun, light trembling in her grasp. Nothing. Just rows of lockers standing silent and still. Then the whisper was right behind her. You shouldn't be here. Maggie whirled around, light flashing wildly, and saw her own reflection staring back at her from the dark glass of a classroom door. But it wasn't right. Her reflection stood still. Her mouth curved into a grin. And then it stepped forward. The glass shattered. Maggie screamed. Maggie stumbled back, shards of glass scattering around her feet. Her reflection, no, the thing, was gone. But the whisper remained, curling around her like cold breath. Maggie. Her pulse thundered. She turned on her heel and ran. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished tile as she bolted down the hallway, phone light bobbing wildly. The whisper followed, growing into an eerie, distorted giggle. She reached the janitor's closet and yanked the door open. Mr. O'Brien. Are you here? Darkness. The scent of industrial cleaner burned her nostrils. A mop bucket stood abandoned, a trail of water leading into the unlit depths of the supply room. The faint drip, 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 echoed inside. Maggie swallowed hard and backed away. Screw this. She needed to get out. Turning, she sprinted toward the cafeteria doors. Maybe she could break a window, set off an alarm, anything to escape. But as she ran, the hallway stretched. The lockers, the posters, the classroom doors, everything seemed to pull away from her, the corridor growing impossibly long. Then the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed her. Maggie skidded to a stop, chest heaving. She fumbled with her phone, but the screen flickered and died. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing against her skin like unseen hands. A single dim glow appeared ahead. The mirror. It stood in the middle of the hallway now, untouched by the darkness. Its glass shimmered like black water. And something moved inside it. A shadow tall and thin, its limbs bending wrong. It had no face, but she could feel its gaze burrowing into her. Then it stepped out of the mirror. Maggie couldn't breathe. Her body refused to move as the figure inched closer, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a marionette on frayed strings. Maggie, it crooned, its voice a warped echo of her own. Come closer. She found her strength and bolted, blindly running into the dark. The sound of scraping feet chased her, closer, closer. A door appeared ahead. The library. She didn't hesitate. She lunged inside, slamming the door shut behind her. Silence. The air was thick with the scent of old books and dust. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, casting eerie patterns on the shelves. She pressed her back against the door, gasping for breath. Outside, the whispers swirled. Then she heard it. A faint thud. Coming from inside the library. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't alone. Something was breathing in the dark with her. And it was getting closer. Maggie's scream barely left her lips before the floor gave way beneath her. Books, dust, and splintered wood tumbled with her as she plunged into the darkness below. The fall wasn't long, but the impact jarred her bones, knocking the air from her lungs. For a moment, all she could do was lie still, gasping, her mind reeling from the shock. Then she heard it. Breathing. Ragged, slow, not her own. She froze. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old paper, but beneath it was something else, something foul like rotting flesh. Swallowing down a wave of nausea, she fumbled for her phone. The screen was cracked, but when she tapped it, the flashlight flickered to life. She was in a tunnel. The walls were made of old bricks, some crumbling at the edges, covered in streaks of moss and grime. The passage stretched ahead and behind her, disappearing into the dark. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This space shouldn't exist beneath the school. A soft scrape echoed from the darkness ahead. Maggie's breath hitched. She slowly turned the light toward the sound. At first she saw nothing but the tunnel. Then just at the edge of the light's reach, something moved. A figure. Twisted. Jerky. Too tall, its limbs too thin. It clung to the ceiling like an insect, its fingers splayed against the bricks, its head tilting too far as it stared at her with hollow, milky eyes. Maggie's body locked up in sheer terror. The thing let out a wet, rattling breath. Then it dropped. She screamed and scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the rough stone floor. The creature's fingers scraped the ground where she had been, its nails curling like claws. It let out a shrill, inhuman hiss and lunged at her. Maggie rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasp. She shoved herself to her feet and ran. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls seeming to close in around her. Her breath came in sharp gasps, panic clouding her mind. She could hear it behind her, the creature's limbs cracking as it crawled at an unnatural speed, its guttural breathing growing closer. Up ahead, the tunnel split into two paths. Maggie didn't have time to think. She bolted left, her feet barely skimming the ground. Then she saw the door. An old, rusted metal door stood embedded in the wall, slightly ajar. She didn't hesitate. She slammed into it, forcing it open, and threw herself inside, kicking it shut behind her. The second it closed, the creature's claws raked against the metal with a horrifying screech. Maggie clamped her hands over her mouth, stifling a sob. The thing outside let out a long, distorted moan, pressing its weight against the door. The hinges groaned. It got inside. A click echoed in the room. Maggie's body went rigid. She wasn't alone. Slowly she turned her flashlight toward the sound. Rows of desks and old chalkboards filled the space. It looked like an abandoned classroom, hidden beneath the school for who knew how long. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs stretched between desks like delicate veins. But that wasn't what made Maggie's stomach drop. At the far end of the room, against the blackboard, sat a row of students. Their clothes were tattered, their skin pale and stretched too tight over their bones. Their heads lolled at unnatural angles, their unblinking eyes staring at nothing. They weren't breathing. They weren't alive. Then one of them twitched. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. Another student's fingers curled slightly against the desk. The boy closest to her lifted his head, his mouth opening far wider than it should, his jaw unhinging like a snake's. Maggie ran. She yanked the door open just as the bodies lurched forward, their movements jerky and unnatural, their bones snapping as if they hadn't moved in years. She sprinted into the tunnel, the sound of dragging feet and guttural moans following her. The path twisted again. She could barely see ahead, her light flickering, her heart slamming against her ribs. Then, just as she thought she was about to collapse, a mirror appeared at the end of the tunnel. It stood tall, impossibly clean despite the filth around it. Maggie's own reflection stared back at her, but her doppelganger's face was wrong. Its eyes too dark, its mouth stretched into a twisted grin. Behind her reflection, shadows writhed. Then her reflection stepped forward. The last thing Maggie heard before the darkness took her was her own voice whispering, "Welcome home." Maggie's world turned inside out. Cold fingers gripped her arms, yanking her into the mirror's liquid-like surface. She didn't fall. She plunged into a suffocating abyss, weightless yet trapped. Darkness wrapped around her like a second skin, squeezing her, draining her breath. Then, she was somewhere else. The walls were the same brick, the floor the same cold stone, but something was off. The air was thicker, tinged with an unnatural silence. Maggie turned, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her reflection still stood in the mirror behind her, smiling. Then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." Maggie's blood ran cold. The voice was hers, but layered with something deeper, something ancient. Her reflection raised a hand, and Maggie felt a searing pain in her own palm. She gasped, looking down to see cracks forming along her skin, like glass splintering from within. "Let me go," Maggie whispered, her voice shaking. The reflection cocked its head. "But you wanted to know the truth, didn't you?" The ground trembled beneath her. The walls flickered, revealing glimpses of rotting faces, empty eye sockets, mouths frozen in silent screams. The students from the abandoned classroom, they were here. Maggie stumbled backward, heart hammering. The figures stepped forward, their movements stilted, their skeletal fingers reaching for her. The whispers swelled around her, forming a deafening chant, her name repeated over and over. She turned to run, but the tunnel had disappeared. All that remained was an endless expanse of mirrors, reflecting her, distorting her, multiplying her fear. Then she saw it. One mirror, slightly different from the others. The glass shimmered like water, revealing the real world beyond it. The school library. The broken floor. A way out. But standing in front of it, blocking her escape, was her reflection. Its grin stretched too wide, its eyes gleaming with something inhuman. Maggie had only seconds to react. With every ounce of strength left, she lunged forward, aiming straight for the glass. The moment she collided with it, pain erupted through her skull, and the world shattered into a million shards. Everything went black. Maggie awoke on the cold wooden floor of the library, her body trembling, her breath ragged. A dull ache throbbed at the back of her skull where she had hit the ground, and her limbs felt like lead. Dust swirled in the dim glow of the flickering overhead lights, and the room was eerily silent, too silent. The mirror was gone. The tunnel was gone. But the sensation of something being wrong lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. She pushed herself up, wincing at the sharp pain in her ribs. Her fingers trembled as she touched her face, her skin damp with sweat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out of the school and never look back, but she had to know, had it all been real? Or was it some nightmarish hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear? She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping over the ruined library. Then her eyes caught something reflective, a large window across the room. Her breath hitched. Her reflection was standing, watching her. But something was off. The Maggie in the glass was not trembling. She was eerily still, her posture perfect, her head slightly tilted in an unnatural way. Her eyes, Maggie felt her stomach drop, were darker, hollow, almost soulless. Then her reflection smiled. A slow, unnatural grin stretched across her mirrored face, widening far beyond what was humanly possible. Maggie stumbled back, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Her own reflection should not be smiling. Then it stepped forward. The glass did not break. The surface rippled like water as the reflection pressed its hands against it, the grin never faltering. Maggie felt her pulse hammering in her ears, her body frozen in sheer terror. A whisper brushed against her ear, though no one was there. "You took my place." Maggie whirled around, her breath coming in short gasps, but the library remained empty. When she turned back to the window, her reflection had returned to normal. But the unease in her stomach did not fade. She staggered out of the library, her mind racing. She needed to get out of the school, away from whatever horror she had just witnessed. But as she walked through the empty halls, the world around her felt wrong. The posters on the walls were different, colors muted, words slightly warped. The fluorescent lights above her flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows that seemed to stretch and twist when she wasn't looking. And then there was the silence. Not just the absence of noise, but an oppressive silence, as if the very air was holding its breath. Maggie's chest tightened. Something was horribly, undeniably wrong. She burst through the front doors of the school and into the parking lot. The night air was cold against her damp skin, but she barely registered it. She reached for her phone in her pocket, her fingers shaking as she pulled it out. No signal. Her heart pounded harder. That wasn't possible. She looked around, expecting to see the usual line of parked cars, the distant glow of streetlights, but the world outside the school was different. The buildings in the distance were distorted, their edges blurred as if they were dissolving into the darkness. The sky was an unnatural shade of black, deeper than anything she had ever seen, and the stars. There were no stars. The realization hit her like a sledgehammer. She never left. A slow, crawling dread seeped into her bones. Her hands shook as she backed away from the parking lot, back toward the school. Maybe if she retraced her steps, she could find the mirror again, find a way back. She turned and saw her reflection standing in the glass doors. On this side. The other Maggie smiled, lifting a hand in a slow wave. Maggie's scream caught in her throat. She took a step back, her pulse thundering in her ears. The reflection, no, the imposter, tilted its head and whispered in a voice that echoed inside Maggie's skull. "Thank you for switching places." Then the school doors slammed shut. Maggie pounded against the glass, her screams muffled by the suffocating silence. But the reflection simply turned away, walking into her world, leaving Maggie trapped in the cold, hollow nightmare on the other side. And no one would ever know. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or people is purely coincidental.